Hello, and welcome to Middle Fantasy, the show where I talk about science fiction and fantasy and try to find the middle ground between the genres. I am your host, Zack. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things, the most aesthetically pleasing thing in my entire arsenal of things I love, and that is Wizard with a Gun! Yes, I love the aesthetic of Wizard with a Gun. I don't necessarily know why. I think just the absurdity of like a wizard in his wizarding robes, his pointy hat, his wizard staff, he's getting ready to do like a lightning bolt. But then he just pulls out a gun and shoots someone is the funniest thing ever to me. And for me, I think that's so pleasing. Just imagine like Gandalf mowing down like a bunch of like orcs with like an AK-47. For me, I'd just be in pure bliss. Though if you like that aesthetic as much as I do, you're certainly going to love the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. Now, a little history about Stormfront. This book was written in 1996. This was actually the college project of Jim Butcher. It's actually a funny story, kind of out of spite. At the same time, a lot like the Codex Alera series that he wrote later on, which we'll get to, is that he was having a hard time writing books. He was like, I don't really know if I should do outlines or anything. This professor was like, you should do an outline. It might really help you. And he's like, fine, I'll do it. But I'm not going to like it, and it's going to be like a story that is just two things that I like. I guess we'll do hard-boiled detective novel with like a wizard, and one thing led to another. He did an outline, he wrote the whole book, and he kind of liked it, and thus the Dresden Files were born. The book was published in 2000, and has gone on to make so many more books. The newest book just came out, Peace Talks, and even Battlegrounds is coming up pretty soon. And it's one of these series that has no sight and end. Obviously, it's planned to be this huge series, and then there's going to be a huge like apocalypse trilogy at the end of it. But for right now, we're going to be talking about Stormfront, which is the first book, which was released 20 years ago. So let's go back in time and really examine this book. It's going to be interesting because it's been a while since I've read it. Usually when it comes to this, I kind of skip the first couple books because we'll get to in the review. But don't worry, everybody, I won't be spoiling any other books in the series. We're going to just be talking about Stormfront today and seeing if it stands on its own, does it really introduce the world, and many, many more things. So sit back, relax, and let's go on a magical journey together, everybody. So what is the plot line of Stormfront? Well, we follow the wizarding detective adventures of a one Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden and his failing detective business. Yay! No, really, like, it's kind of failing. It's in the yellow pages under Wizard Detective, and it's doing really poorly. I guess it's right next to Nancy Drew, their Hardy Boys, and the Babysitters Club, because he's not getting any work. He's pretty much going to be evicted very soon. He can barely afford gas, Coca-Cola, and all the other things he even needs to practice his wizarding stuff. But luck might have it as one day he's given two cases. One's a missing persons case, while the other's a grisly double homicide. Now it's up to Harry Dresden to solve the case. Now, are they connected? Is there something more nefarious going on? There's twists and turns as we have this fast-paced mystery adventure story set in the mean streets of Chicago. And for me, the one thing that I love about Stormfront up front is actually the setting, because it isn't like a fantastical world. It isn't like your Hogwarts or your Pern or any of these other mystical places. It's just Chicago, you know, the Windy City. Home to the Chicago deep dish pizza, the river that flows backward, the invention of the Twinkie, you know, also my favorite, the H.H. Holmes Murder Hotel. But in all honesty, I love what about the setting for this is how grounded in reality it is. It is supposed to be like a present day type of story, much like how Constantine is how each book is pretty much set in the year that it's written in, and you go up to even like Peace Talks now, it's written modern day, where this book was written 2000s, takes place in the 2000s, and has that setting, though it isn't necessarily like Shadowrun where you have trolls and like motorcycles shooting people with shotguns. It's very like mundane. Everyone doesn't necessarily know about the mystery. They don't necessarily know about the magic. They don't necessarily know about much of anything. It's just Chicago. And that's something that I love about this book really does introduce here, is that setting, because Harry Dresden, everyone doesn't take him seriously. Everyone thinks it's a joke that he's like a wizard detective. Like, everyone doesn't think wizards exist. But yet, within this world, you have things because it's Chicago. You can deal with the mob. Vampires run their own racketeering, nefarious things. And if you know where to look, things start to come more mysterious through this book. Though, what I love about that's grounded in this is that we see different sides of Chicago. You see the police force is Harry is trying to discover the murder mystery. You see the seedy underbelly with like the Chicago mob. You see things like vampires, and as Harry is going place to place, we're seeing more magical things in a very urban fantasy setting. I consider this like the milestone for urban fantasy, just because it's a mixture of like Americana, medieval fantasy, and just a little sprinkle of what Jim Butcher likes, and that is just absurdity. And it really does make the series more stand out, especially when it comes to Stormfront, where we're getting this a little differently, because when it comes to this book, the way that it's written compared to the other ones, it really does lean into the hard-boiled, like, noir style, like the Maltese Falcon, Chinatown, The Big Sleep, where you have like these huge monologues that Harry's giving in his mind about like, here I had all these paperback books I'm throwing, and we see like the double murder and stuff. He explains in like gruesome detail, but it just adds to the flavor of the story. Now, when it comes to the story, the other thing that I love about this as well is kind of the characters. Now, this is like your very run-of-the-mill type of like NCIS or like Blacklist, where you have the police captain, you have Karen Murphy, you have a reporter like Susan Rodriguez, you have the crime lord, and you have all these different elements that make it almost like an hour special of like, we're watching this detective show and here are your cast of characters. Though there's one thing about this book that's kind of a little, it hasn't aged well, and it's weird to go back in time and read this and be like, oh yeah, this is the reason why I don't necessarily read this book anymore. And that is kind of how Jim Butcher would write female characters, because they're not characters in the sense of them doing things. It's more like they're objects to be saved and also lusted after, because again, he really leans into the hard-boiled nature of this. Is supposed to be like the femme fatale, like the LA noir, like there I was, and a beautiful dame came in and she had long luscious legs and stuff, and you have him like fawning over stuff and like these weird sexual tension moments where he's explaining every anatomy of the woman, and it's really hard to read because it's just so early. It's hard because like I'm trying to find the right words to say about this, just because later on in the series, after the third book, he like completely changes, though Harry doesn't change, which I find really interesting, especially in Stormfront. Harry is kind of very much the same person he is right now as he is in Peace Talks, and that's the one thing I like about him. He's very true to his nature. He's humorous, he has a lot of witty observations, but at the same time, he takes things very seriously. He treats magic very seriously. And that's kind of the core of the story is like, do we like Harry Dresden as a character? Yeah, he's like the person, he's like the Han Solo, he's like the Indiana Jones. Like, he gets the shit kicked out of him many, many times throughout this book. He still gets up, and you still root for him because you like that homespun type of hero, even though he's a wizard detective, and he might be morally gray in some things, but there's some things in his character that he really does have concrete natures to. Though, when it comes to this book, especially when it comes to Stormfront, does the mystery work? Yes, I feel like when it comes to this mystery, it's, even though this is a really short book, it's a very slow burn type of book, because the first parts of this book are very much like molasses, but once you get to like the halfway point, there's a part in the book where instantly you're like, oh my god, it's like a race against time, and it becomes like thriller pacing, which for me, I really do enjoy. If you can get past the hurdle of him setting up the world, how he drives his shitty car, how he does this, how he conducts business, how he goes around Chicago, you're good in that way. Though, that's the great thing I kind of like about the monologues here, is that he fills in the gaps without having to ask someone. Like, he doesn't have to have a Watson character, which I really do enjoy. Like, if it was like an average mystery story, you'd have someone that's like, I just got a new job hired by Harry Dresden, and I'm now his chummy pal. But it isn't like that. You're just following Dresden's footsteps. And that's something that I really do enjoy about it, is that it's all on him. You have like the weight of the world on his shoulders, but at the same time, because he's a wizard and he knows the inner workings of the magic system, we're introduced to it almost in a more refreshing way, because he's explaining it as if like he's telling the files. Like, again, it's the Dresden Files. Like, he's telling the story, even though it's happening in real time. He's like talking about somewhat in the past tense, but it's hard to explain until like you read it. It's very much like a noir story where you have like the Maltese Falcon, where you have the main character just having like lines of like narration and his inner thoughts are like on screen, and you have those moments. It really transfers here really well. Now, like any good urban fantasy story, how is the magic system? Now, the magic system, the Dresden Files, I actually really do enjoy, and when it comes to Stormfront, it really does show it very, very well, because the magic system here is very grounded, it's based off physics, and the most important thing about the magic system in this world is that it doesn't solve everything. Everything has a price. No, you have to like figure things out. You can't just say magic words and now I have the villain. The villain is now here because I have summoned the soul of the murdered person to tell me everything. Doesn't work like that. And I love that just because magic doesn't solve all the issues. Harry Dresden can do cool things like shoot fire, lightning, and do everything in between, but it isn't something that's like makes him super amazing and awesome because he doesn't know everything. He's still training. He has a parole officer who is following him around making sure he doesn't kill anybody because in the society there is like a white council and they're pretty much like, you know, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not do necromancy, thou shalt not be weird and awesome, but also murder people because if you do, we're gonna murder the shit out of you, which is a plot element in this and it really works because as you see throughout the world, it really does really ground the world. Like the magic system is so faithful to like what it's trying to do. Like there isn't a bending of the rules. There's no the moment of like, I got you on a technicality. If I'm doing it during like a full moon, my power's like super amazing, but also because I'm fighting you self-defense wise, I win and I don't have any consequences. No, the magic system has consequences and it's grounded, and that's what makes it so much fun. It's so easy to follow. You can give this book to anyone that doesn't necessarily like magic or like is trying to get into magic. Like it's like the step above Harry Potter, like after like, you know, you just have to say magical words and things will appear. This is, you need magic words. He explains things like thermodynamics. He explains a lot of amazing mystical things, but that's what makes it so great is that you have to explain things, but it isn't like a Brandon Sanderson magic system where you have to like pull out the chart at the back of the book and be like, yes, if I look to subsection 456. Yeah, it isn't like that. It's very straightforward and really eases people into that type of world. Now, what is the age range of this book? I feel like when it comes to this series, it's a little different because the premise alone is like, wizard with a gun, magical wizard detective. You can give this to like an 8-year-old. No, not Stormfront. Stormfront's very explicit. It has some dirty moments. It has some sexual moments. It has some horrific moments. Though, if you're okay with that type of stuff, you can give it to like a 12 to 13-year-old. I wouldn't give it to anyone younger than that because, again, there's a lot of sexual tension. There's a lot of elements in this book that are very PG-13 going on. There isn't like actually, again, I take that back. There's some gratuitous sex stuff, but again, this is the only book that really does occur. Everything else, it doesn't because, again, he like really leans into that hard-boiled cop stuff. If you go to like Fool's Moon or like Grave Peril, it starts to like diminish because this is like the gritty crime book. And I would just recommend, like, if you're going to send this to a kid, have some caution just because there are some elements in this book that might not be suitable for all ages. It isn't a book that you can just give to a kid and expect them to like really understand everything. This is the book that you're going to have questions about afterwards. And it's hard to explain because there are some grisly murder stuff. Like Jim Butcher's really good at descriptions of like eviscerated bodies and just straight up just horrific crime scene deaths. Like I'm not going to go into detail, but it's one of those where he's really good at certain things. And this is a book that you just have to caution on the side of caution a little bit. It's a baby steps type of book. If you can get past those hurdles, you'll really kind of like start to appreciate this book a little more. And it's one of those stories that I recommend for a lot of people that also love the mystery genre, love the fantasy genre, because they're pretty much the exact same thing. They just added magic and mystery to it, and I think that really does work. Now, would I recommend this book? Yes, I feel like when it comes to this book, I do recommend it. I recommend it to new readers of fantasy, old readers of fantasy, everything in between, just because the book does have a lot of rough edges because Jim Butcher was like really, again, this was his college project that he turned into an actual writing career. And you can see that, you can see like the 90s ooze of it a little bit. And it does, like, this is a book that's also hard because it's not even in my top 5 favorite books. But yet at the same time, I like it for many reasons. It's a book that you get into, you can easily, you know, devote yourself to this series and have a lot of fun. Though, like for me, I was always told start in the 3rd book and then go forward. If you want to go in chronological order, you can. If you don't want to, you can start by book 3 and then pick up the pieces that way. But this is a book that does stand on its own, and it's one of these books that I recommend to most people. Again, side of caution, if you can get past the descriptions of female characters for this book, I think you're going to be good. And that's Stormfront. I really do enjoy this series. It's very near and dear to my heart, and I'm very excited to actually talk to you all more about it in the coming months, just because the world is so vast and mysterious, and also it's a good starting point for when it comes to fantasy, trying to find that middle ground between mystery, horror, urban fantasy, and a lot of other amazing things when it comes to it. And we're going to be exploring a lot of the themes, a lot of the mysteries, who Harry Dresden is, and I'm so excited for that. If you guys like this video, maybe consider subscribing down below. If you liked it, maybe hit a thumbs up on the video. I'd really appreciate that. What is your favorite Dresden Files book? Did you like this book? And if so, why don't you leave some of your favorite quotes down below? And I'm really excited to do more of these. Well, thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have an amazing day, have an amazing journey. May the food and drink ever be tasteful, and may your books be magical with adventure. See you, everybody. Bye!